Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. All right, so Emily and I are back. It's good morning, my friend.
Cheers.
Cheers. Coffee and tea. Emily is a tea drinker, which really wigs me out.
It really freaks him out.
I'm like,
he's like, you're my only house guest ever who doesn't drink coffee.
Yeah, I'm like, come on.
Every time I'm here, you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Well, one of the things that Emily and I often get from friends of ours and just from people in general. Well, one, we talked about this before. They oftentimes think we have a romantic connection. We're just, we're both cis hetero. I'm cis hetero male. She's cis hetero female. We've never been romantically involved. We've been very close. And there's never been that vibe as we often talk about.
Ever.
But it kind of goes into this idea of, talking about friendships in general. And I guess we'll focus a little bit on men, but friendships inside of relationships. And also we can start with just that conversation that, people oftentimes say, men and women, if they're single, they can't really be friends. And even people would argue, even when they're in a relationship, it is a very dangerous thing to have men and women be very close friends, and that can interfere with relationships. And we both have opinions on this, and I think it's an important conversation because, very clearly, this can become very difficult to manage in relationships. It can break relationships up. It can become a source of frustration and difficulty and cause all kinds of havoc inside of relationships. So I'll let you open it up with your thoughts about, opposite sex friendships in general, and then opposite sex friendships in the context of a romantic relationship where then you have a very close friend or even a best friend of the opposite sex who is heterosexual, or of the same romantic inclination, as that person. Does that disrupt the couple? And what are your thoughts around that? And what can we offer in terms of this conversation for people who are listening to this and how to manage it?
Well, I think that you and I are a really good pair to talk about this because we've explored this from various angles of everything that you just said, including, like romantic partners and stuff. So I think that one of the reasons why people often, and again, I'm just using us as an example because it's convenient. People often look at us and are so surprised that we don't have any sort of romantic involvement because there is this sort of cultural underlying disbelief that a hetero man and a hetero woman can be friends and have nothing else going on. There's just sort of this core like, oh, someone must be harboring feelings, or it's only a matter of time before something develops, or something must have happened in the past and then one of them shut it down, or whatever it is. And there seems to be this misunderstanding in a lot of ways about the fact that a man and a woman can actually just be friends. And then when each of those people have romantic relationships that get involved as well, this is where some things can get definitely very tricky because it's really important to own your partner and to make them feel involved and welcomed in the friendship by both parties in the friendship. Both people need to make that active effort. And we actually just had a great conversation about this yesterday with your partner. And we were talking about, because she and I have very similar views on how these types of things should be managed. And you are deeply important to me. You're one of the people closest to my heart as a platonic friend, and you have been for some time. And it is therefore very important to me that whoever is most important in your life, I make a very active effort to befriend them on my own, not even like, using you as the proxy. Like I go straight to them and I like introduce myself and I have a chat with them and I am warm with them because I want to get to know them, because I have a lot of respect for you, and you clearly see amazing qualities in this person or these people. And then that is really important to me. And I want them to feel comfortable with me being in your life. And on my side of the equation, I have dated men who have not been comfortable with my friendship with you. They have referred to it as very unconventional. And I said, well, I'm unconventional. I don't know what you want from me. Yeah. And I've also made it very clear that you're not going anywhere. Like you are family to me, and you are like my brother, and I am very loyal human. And this is another factor that can come into place, because sometimes the things that we love most about a partner can also end up being the things that we end up disliking about them. So partners of mine love my loyalty, but they might not love my loyalty when it means that I am also loyal to you as my friend. Mm-hmm. And that there has to be some compromise there. And I am also the first one to say that, yes, conversations need to be had, communication needs to be had. There needs to be dynamics that are involved here to make your partner feel as comfortable as possible with it, while still also taking note of your own values, your own cultivating your own rich, fulfilling life outside of your romantic relationship as well. Like all of these things are really important, and there has to be some balance that gets created within the context of the relationship.
Mm. Yeah, I think that last little part you talked about there, I think for me, I kind of see it as like I can understand this perhaps if you're 20. If you're 19, 20, 21, 22, you haven't had many relationships. You have a sort of a Disney Hollywood fairy tale version of relationships. You've just come out of high school, and you're thinking that there's always some kind of attraction there. I think as you begun to move into your 30s and 40s and have perhaps more experience, that this should begin to, in my opinion. Now, I think we all should check in with ourselves. We're human. There's no judgment here. If this is something that continues to bother you, you're not alone. In fact, you're probably in the majority. But in my way, and again, I always like to say, like I'm also unconventional. And a lot of the listeners know that I like it very much when we can have a charitable disagreement. And so, but my opinion on this is that there is an element of immaturity, in my opinion. It's not a judgment. I'm not trying to say, you're bad or whatever. I'm not trying to say I'm good or whatever. I'm just saying I believe, perhaps wrongly, maybe, that this is a level of immaturity in relationships, that as you mature in relationships, you start to have some understandings. And these are the understandings that I think you should begin to have in a mature relationship. Here are some of them. First, this idea that your romantic partner can be and or should be your everything, I think is an immature belief. And I think that once you have any kind of level of experience in relationships, you find that view causes a lot of issues, because ultimately a relationship should be something that enhances and grows each other. And if you two are the only people enhancing and growing each other, you can become in a box. It's very much the same way if I'm just an individual and I don't have any friends at all, right? I just become in this circular thinking, and I never get outside of my own beliefs. And I become very entrenched and dogmatic and biased and see the world in a very narrow way. I think if your only, growth outlet is your romantic partner, the two of you can easily get into that sort of same cycle. And so I'm a big proponent of You have to have your life. I have to have my life. And then we have our life. And I oftentimes call this the you-me dynamic. So there's you and you alone as an entity. There's me and me alone as an entity. And when we come together, we create this third entity that I like to call you/me or you-me. And ultimately, from my perspective, if you and me as independent entities create this third entity and make that us and try to make that us, we lose ourselves. And then we cannot sustain the relationship. Versus if each of us are pouring energy into this thing while also pulling energy out, and perhaps most importantly, gathering energy from outside sources that have nothing to do with the you, me, us, and the you. And by doing that, we're able to pull resources, energetic resources from outside the relationship and infuse that into the relationship. So there's always this source of new energy, new knowledge, coming refreshed and wanting to hang out with the person so we don't get burnt out on that particular person. And we're building this you-me dynamic to be a very strong thing. So to me, then I go, you need to have an outside world. And that outside world should include, in my mind, a diverse group of individuals, including people of the same romantic inclination as you. Here would be an example that you and I have shared. You may be dating someone, and this has happened with you and I might be interested in or dating someone, and I say, let me get a female's perspective on this, and a hetero female, because I'm hetero, perspective on this. Am I right or am I wrong in this? And that alone allows me to see it more from my partner's point of view just by talking to you. Likewise, there's certain things that you and I might vibe with and have conversations about that I might not have with my romantic partner. Perhaps they're not as business oriented. They don't like having conversations about dynamics of relationships, where you and I, that's sort of where we are constantly in that zone of like what makes a good relationship, a bad relationship romantically. Maybe they don't want to have those conversations. And so from my perspective, I can pull from interacting with you understandings about my partner, as well as I can pull sort of these areas that me and my partner don't necessarily vibe on. Another example of this would be my mother and my father, who my mother had her art and her friends who were her art friends. And many of her teachers who were her mentors were men. And my father, rather than stifling that or being jealous about that, was just, this is Joyce's thing. And she needs this, whether conscious or unconscious. He was like, this is something that she gets filled up by. Now, if he's going to be jealous related to these mentors who are men, or her going to these conferences where there's men in her field, in this artistic field, he's going to essentially suppress some of my mother's outlets into the world, which is going to, without him even know, stifle or smother an aspect of their relationship. So in a very real sense, in my opinion, you have any type of experience in this realm, you start to realize that if you're going to start to police your partner's relationships outside of the you-me dynamic, you are going to smother unknowingly oftentimes a certain aspect of the you-me dynamic. The final thing I'll say here is that, yes, it is very important to have the conversation. And I'm a person who's had an affair in the past. And that affair came from a relationship that was just a friendship. So I'm fully aware of the risks that many people have, because I did fall for those risks. So you might say, well, Jade, and how are you saying both? Because I would say that it was not the friendship idea that, this person came into my world. What I'm saying and hypothesizing here is that the you-me dynamic of me and my wife at that time was fractured and frayed to a large degree because I did not have a whole lot of friends outside of that relationship. And that is what opened me up to that particular person. Now, I know this seems completely backwards to people because they're saying, well, if you weren't exposed to anyone else, you wouldn't have been able to make this romantic connection. And I simply go, that's the risk of being in romantic dynamic with somebody, and you can have it one of two ways. You can either stifle them and try to police all their relationships, including their opposite sex relationships, or you can just say, I'm going to be confidently detached, which you and I have done a podcast on that as well. I'm going to build and sustain this you-me dynamic and really help my partner get everything they need outside and everything they need inside the relationship so we can grow this relationship, knowing full well the risks. Versus the other approach is, let me try to stifle the relationship. Let me try to police it, which is exhausting in itself. And I think what that's going to do is that is actually going to shrink that you-me dynamic faster, and they're going to find outside outlets, and you're actually going to force it that direction. So I know some people might say, I just disagree with that. And other people might say, I see what you're saying, Jade. But from my perspective, this is really the only way it works. And this doesn't come just from my experience. It comes from working with hundreds, if not thousands of people in this domain. We work in this domain. I read research in this domain. So do you. I honestly think this is the way to approach it, and we can rehash it. So I want to see what your thoughts are. And there are risks here, and we might want to even talk about how do we manage those risks. And I have thoughts about that, but I want to see what you have to say about all of that.
That's what I was going to bring up too, is like maybe helping to guide some people around some of the lines, because you and I kind of mentioned that on an episode that we did around dating, social media, and like dating with integrity. So we can reference that one as well, but there are some aspects of that. But first, I do really want to mention sorry, my mic is getting too close to me. I think that one of the aspects is the idea of like being stifled in a relationship, because I have been in relationships before where I have been the one stifled. I've been in relationships before where I was probably the one doing some of the stifling. And the problem with that is that one of the most painful parts of the ending of a relationship that had become a very unhealthy dynamic is not so much the losing of the other person, it's the recovery from the losing the pieces of ourselves. Because we can get over the heartbreak in, weeks, months, whatever. Usually that happens actually faster. It can sometimes feel excruciatingly long, but that normally actually happens faster than the recovery of the pieces that we lost of ourselves, which can take years to recover. And I talk to people about that a lot because it's an aspect of heartbreak that we don't always separate out. And the reason why I bring that up is that when we are in a relationship where we feel stifled and we allow that self-betrayal to happen, then it actually is damaging us at the same time too. And we have to be really conscious of that whenever we are doing that to another person, or whenever we are having that done to us, and we play a role in like allowing that other person to do that to us because we take responsibility for our own actions, then that really, it not only kills off a part of ourselves, but it also is an absolute breeding ground for contempt and resentment within the context of the relationship. And we talked on another episode that we recorded about why people want to be in relationships. And I brought up the fact that I argued the fact, because you don't necessarily agree with me, but there are aspects of ourselves that we can't necessarily access or tap into fully without a romantic relationship, the right romantic relationship to allow us to see those parts of us. And when we're in a romantic relationship where we are feeling stifled, then it no longer becomes growth oriented at all. It becomes crushing. It's crushing. And we can feel that. I have had the experience of being in a relationship where I could feel parts of myself dying off. And now I'm so conscious to it that if I feel that at all, I know that either something in the dynamic has to shift very quickly, or on both sides, or that the relationship is not going to work. And I will not tolerate it at all from myself or from anyone else. So that's a really important piece. And just the entire idea of allowing, like, to me, love means expanding into the fullness of ourselves and helping the other person to expand into the fullness of of themselves as well. And a lot of that comes with having these enriching lives that each of us bring to the table, and not just cutting that off just because you're in a romantic relationship with each other. And that also ties into like cultivating time to like miss each other a little bit, and really bringing that back into the relationship in a really beautiful way. Now, the other side of that is when we are talking about even the aspects of coming to a friend. Let's say like I'm coming to you with a relationship problem that I'm having, and you and I have done this multiple times on both sides. And there's also a moment there where we have to, and you and I have talked about this, just figuring out when we're coming to somebody with a relationship issue, not overstepping betraying the intimacy of the romantic relationship by doing that. So Jade, if I'm coming to you with a relationship issue, I want to make sure that I'm doing it in a way where my partner, I'm still preserving the intimacy of my relationship with my partner. And the same for you, because there are very intimate aspects of a romantic relationship that need to stay within the context of that relationship. I feel that there are lines where I'm not going to just, spill all my partner's dirty secrets to my best friend, because that would betray my partner in a lot of ways. And that would betray my own moral code that I hold myself to for that other person. So we have to sometimes figure out where those lines are too, like giving you the necessary information as my dear friend to be able to have enough of the picture to give me advice on it, while not overstepping and making my partner potentially feel really uncomfortable. Like, oh, I only told you that. I didn't want that to go outside of the relationship. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then I think we should also get into a little bit more of the intricacies of how to show up in a friendship when with someone of the opposite sex, particularly once that person gets involved with someone.
Mm. Well, I think absolutely it's critical, but this goes back to just what you're talking about there in terms of sharing too much about the relationship goes back, I think, to just good social dynamics in particular. For example, I talk a lot about gossip, and we should talk a little bit about this. And, gossip is one of these things that is a key aspect of being human. Researchers have looked at this. They've studied societies and how gossip impacts relationships. And what they find is that gossip has this sort of dual effect. On the one hand, the two people talking about, the other person not in the room. And by the way, it's about 80% of the conversations that we have with others are about people not in the room. It's a very high amount of our conversation. And to me, I go, this idea of someone not being in the room and you talking about them, it can go one of two ways. It can actually make the person you're talking to not trust you, be suspicious of you, or it can make you two become much more close. And from my perspective, after reading this research and sort of putting together, sort of my way of looking at it, I look at it like there's sort of this idea of venting, dishing, and then talking shit. And venting is more like, hey, look, I've got this thing going on with my partner. Like if you're talking to me about a romantic partner, I've got this thing going on and just wondering what your take is on it. And when you explain it to me, it's not shedding the other person in a negative light. It's actually playing a very objective game where you're like, they see it this way. I see it this way. I'm just wondering how you see it. This is sort of, from my perspective, just this sort of venting. It's just like, I'm a little bit frustrated with the fact that we see things differently, but maybe I'm wrong. So it's not this idea that they're wrong and they're bad and I'm right and whose side are you going to be on? It's more on this thing of like, I'm struggling with this a little bit. And to me, I think that is a very healthy, natural way to have to gossip. And I think that those kind of conversations, the way you know that it's healthy is you would probably feel comfortable, maybe not as completely comfortable if they weren't in the room, but you wouldn't. If that whole conversation was recorded and played back to the person who wasn't in the room, you wouldn't feel like you did anything wrong. There would be no guilt, no shame, and you would kind of be like, they would see it perhaps the same way. And that's how I look at it. I'm always like, if my conversation is being recorded, and I'll come back to this in dynamics with people outside the relationship as well. But I always feel like if my conversation was recorded and played back to someone in the room, would I feel in my integrity without shame or guilt? So to me, that's venting. Dishing to me goes into a little bit. It starts to get into this realm of my status is trying to be elevated. I feel somehow less than, or perhaps held down, perhaps, or like I am in the right and they're in the wrong. It starts to become this sort of charge, negative, positive, and a subtle, tell me I'm right, tell me they're wrong, or a subtle me trying to raise my status while lowering theirs. And it's a gray zone in this area because it's hard to put a handle on it, but you can know because you kind of go, all right, like this is starting to feel a little bit like, this person is not here to defend themselves. You ever have that feeling where it's like this person isn't here to defend themselves, and maybe really this is getting slightly uncomfortable versus like an outright like she's a bitch or he's an asshole or you wouldn't believe the shit he did or this and that. To me, that last part is absolutely off limits when you're talking to a friend about your relationship, whether it's, a same-sex friend or an opposite-sex friend. That is completely disrespectful. And from my perspective, being someone that you might want to talk to about, I would not tolerate that. I'd be like, and I have in the past when I was younger, and I've always been embarrassed about it. The dishing part too, I would be like, I'm not feeling comfortable with this. The venting part is how to handle these things. So that's the first thing I would say about gossip. The venting part of like, I see it this way, they see it this way. Would you lend a perspective? That's the kind of conversations I think you should be having. Otherwise, it tilts too much into the zone where your romantic partner could be like, what the fuck? Like what? Why are you having this conversation in that way? And in that venting department, you keep a lot of things under wraps. Now, this goes, in my mind, same thing. If you're in a relationship with a man, and especially if I'm single, but just in general, if I'm going to send messages to Emily, I'm going to include your partner. I do this a ton with all my very close girlfriends, and I am a tough person to be in a relationship with because I have most of my friends are girl buddies, and I have a lot of exes who are friends. But what I will always do is include them in the conversation. Like, it's Thanksgiving right now, so when I'm sending out, hey, happy Thanksgiving, love you, it will be, hey, happy Thanksgiving, love you too, hope you both had the best relationship. And the reason I do that is for their benefit, for my benefit, and the partner's benefit. Because again, I like to have this thing where I'm like, if someone saw this, would I feel in my integrity, or does it give anyone any wiggle room? And oftentimes I will send two separate messages, and Thanksgiving actually is a great time to do it because I'll just be like, I'm so grateful that Emily, has a friend like you and that I've gotten to know you and that we're becoming close and blah, blah, blah. And this is how, in my mind, you sort of begin to do this. You include the other person's romantic partner constantly, including when you're going out and asking out. Let's all do dinner sometimes. It's got to be an inclusive thing. And this brings me to my girlfriend, who's just pretty damn amazing at this, but she does have some strong boundaries, rightly so. And I'll let you take off on this and then we'll come back to it. But she has a particular rule. The reason why you and her, sort of got close outside of me is because it's like what she says is she goes, look, if your girlfriends, from my perspective, if it was me, because she does, and we all do this, me, you, and her all do this, where I'm like, if it's me, I want people to behave oftentimes in a way that I would find appropriate. And so she would say, if I'm making friends with a guy who has a girlfriend, I'm going to reach out to that girlfriend directly. And you did that, and you always do that, by the way. You did that with her, and you always sort of do that with her. And a couple other of my girlfriends have done that with her, and others have not. And rightly so, she goes, these girls I'm completely fine with because I know them. I've developed a relationship with them. They obviously have reached out to me, and the others I feel a bit uncomfortable with. And again, rightly so. So there's three things right there that I think are important. I want to get your take, and then we can go in a couple directions, but I do think we should not forget, this idea of talking a little bit more about how you build your own energetics up with outside relationships. But I do think that this has to be inclusive. you can't just be like, hey, I have these other friendships. You're not involved with them. So, and that, I think that includes men as well. And I'll just say one more thing that you said just to drive this home. The worst thing we can do as humans is we all know what this is like when we're having a rough relationship and we dish and or shit talk too much to other people, especially family members and friends, about how difficult this has been. And then they end up hating that person. And then we're mad at them because they hate our person when we don't realize we're the ones that caused it in the first place because we only gave them one side of the story. And this happens all the time where family will just not like this person because they've only always got, because the person is too immature or hasn't developed the maturity to not shit talk and doesn't realize that they've created the hate. They've created the disconnect between their friends and family and their romantic partner. And that, in the end, that also ends up breaking up the relationship because they just go, everyone hates my person. Why? Not realizing that they hate your person because you train them to hate your person. Let me interrupt the show just for a few minutes because I want to tell you about one of our sponsors, Evolve Telemed. One of the questions I get all of the time, one of the services that you are asking me for constantly is hormone replacement therapy. Women going through menopause, women going through perimenopause, women in postmenopause, women under stressful situations who are dealing with low sex hormone levels, estrogen and progesterone, are constantly asking me about progesterone therapy or estrogen and progesterone therapy. And men, same thing, constantly asking me about testosterone replacement therapy. Plenty of you, many of you, always asking, Jade, can you prescribe me hormones? I need testosterone if you're a man, or I need estrogen and progesterone or testosterone if you're a woman. And I always have to say that I am no longer seeing patients in this way because my educational duties are keeping me so busy. And this is where Evolve Telemed comes in. I have been looking for a company that does bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, and that is critically important. If you're going to be doing HRT or TRT, HRT being hormone replacement therapy for women, TRT being testosterone replacement therapy for men, if you are going to do these therapies, you want the bioidentical hormones. You want the hormones that your body makes naturally, that your body can recognize, that is no different from the hormones your body would make if you were making adequate levels. Bioidentical hormone replacement therapy does just this. And Evolve Telemed is a company that I am now using for my own testosterone replacement needs and have been super impressed with the way that they have structured their business model. And so I am now bringing this service to you through my partnership with Evolve Telemed. Essentially, the way this works is you go online, you make an appointment with Evolve. Evolve gets a doctor with you on a Zoom call. They go through your whole case. They go through your blood labs. They then prescribe your hormones directly to you, and you can get those hormones wherever you are. You do not have to go to a clinic near you. All you need is to have an internet access point, and you can meet with an expert in bioidentical hormone replacement therapy and get those prescriptions. Now you can see why this is so powerful, can't you? Because this is something that so many of us need and can benefit from for our aging needs, our sexual health needs. These things have profound impact on mood, hair, skin, erections, libido, you name it. These things do everything for our metabolic health and vitality. So I am incredibly excited to bring Evolve Telemed to you. Now, the link that you go to is drjade.com/hormones. drjade.com/hormones. This will bring you to the Evolve Telemed portal. If you use the code Next Level, you will get a discount on checkout for your first patient visit. I'm very excited to be able to bring this to you, and I hope you will use Evolve Telemed. I know you're going to find it extremely powerful to move your hormone needs over to them. Check them out, Evolve Telemed. Use the link drjade.com/hormones. drjade.com/hormones for Evolve Telemed. And let's get back to the show.
And because they're being protective too. You know, when I was in my 9-year relationship, there was a really significant issue that we had years before we ended up breaking up. And it did not make him look good. Like, if I had shared what had gone on, it would not have made him look good at all. And I was very conscious to that. And I was in a moment where I was like, okay, even if we do end up breaking up from this, I want it to be on like my terms, our terms, as opposed to having outside influence around that. So it was the type of situation where I kind of had to share it with like a couple people very closest to me, but I knew that they would not share it outside of that. And I also knew that I could trust them to not be judgmental and hold it against my partner at the time. But other than that, I kept it under absolute lock and key because I was so conscious of what you're talking about, Jade, where I was like, I refuse to have anyone in my life turn against my partner, especially if he and I end up working it out and it's fine. And he and I did end up working it out, and things were fine relatively for the next few years until things ended for a different reason. But I even have clients actually that they sometimes, if they're having a really significant issue, I had one of these things recently where a client came to me and my client said, you know, you are literally the only person I'm coming to with this because I don't want anyone in my life to turn against my partner because, yeah, they fucked up. They made a mistake and I recognize that it was a mistake, but I don't want anyone to think about them differently. And I think I'm glad you mentioned that because that's a really important point to make. And yes, I get it. Like sometimes we do need to get an outside perspective. We need to be able to gain an opinion or even sometimes a validation. Sometimes, like as someone who was like gaslighted for many years, there have been moments where something that I thought was normal wasn't actually necessarily normal. And I needed a very trusted person outside of me to remind me of that, to reflect it back to me. So yes, it can absolutely be valuable, but just being really conscious of that. The other thing too, that I think that we need to mention a little bit is the whole idea. I think that one of the reasons why men and women are often looked at as not being able to be friends often gets a little bit more turned towards the man of like, oh, he must be into her. And obviously this can very much go both ways, clearly. But I do think that a lot of people look at the men like, oh, he must want to just fuck her. And first of all, that's not fair to like turn it more towards one than the other because it can very much go both ways. But how do we kind of finesse that a little bit to change some of the perspectives around that? Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that because that is a really common opinion that I hear.
Yeah, and again, it's an incredibly immature.
Absolutely,
it's an incredibly immature, naive, and just a culture level perspective. The idea that men are somehow at the whims of their penis is just plain dumb and in fact insulting.
It is insulting.
You know, and from my perspective, any man with any sense of self and any shit would just be like, you know what? I don't mess with people who believe stuff like that. However, it is something that is seen. And let's talk a little bit about why that is so. The fact of the matter is, men, when they are young, again, gross generalization, there is a lot of exploration that goes on. And they are very much, I think, perhaps more so. And again, we need to, you know, with this, we have to be very loose with these gross generalizations because women are far more private in their sexuality because of culture level concerns. Men are far more open in their sexuality because of culture level concerns, meaning that when we are young, a man who is, has lots of sexual partners or seems to be someone who gets female attention is not looked down upon. In fact, with their male friends and with society in general, it's either A, not looked down upon, or perhaps even looked like, oh, this person is, I don't know, like, positively, you'll oftentimes be looked at, especially amongst men. Now, it's the opposite on the other side. A woman who is seen to be too romantically involved with too many people culture has this either they lean that, oh, she's, must be a slut or must be a whore or whatever. And so some of these things are at play here, right? So women would be necessarily far less likely to be open about their sexual advances and their sexual experience versus men. So when we are young, we have these dynamics going on. Men are often less hiding it. Women are, a little bit more subtle in it. So this is where some of these ideas come from. I also would say, men and testosterone, and just from an evolutionary perspective, this has some reasoning behind it as well. Men have a propensity to want to, quote, spread their seed when they are young. And if they don't have, standards and, values and an honor code and things like this can become the pursuit of power and pleasure through romantic encounters. And you'll see many, many people like this. Now, we don't know the extent to which this is going on with women. It certainly is actually going on quite a lot, if not as much. It is just not the same way of doing it. For example, women who poach other people's mates. This is a very common thing that is very subtle among women, of younger, because they gain a sense of status and a sense of, if I'm getting attention from this particular man who's with someone else. And so a lot of this stuff is going on. So I think we have to look at this with a grain of salt. But I do think from an evolutionary perspective, and if we're looking at young men, what you're saying here is perhaps true. What we have to then do is go, let's try to look at this as next level men who've had experiences, who have learned, who are very honest with their romantic inclinations. I'm a monogamist. I'm a serial monogamist. I'm a ethical non-monogamist. I'm polyamorous. Like, we have many different things, and it's really about being sort of honest here. But it is very insulting to a mature man to be seen as a 20-year-old man. In the same way that it would be very insulting for someone to say to a woman, women are just so emotionally volatile and, or, oh, she must be on her period or whatever. Incredibly, rude and, obviously not true, with, an individual. But certainly we can see when we are young, that some of this stuff might be going on. Women having menses for the first time, not understanding some of the brain changes and being a particular way. And then that follows women, throughout, society. And so we have to give these notions up if we want next level human, relationships. And so I don't know if I answered that question fully or if you had something else in mind that you wanted me to cover, but I think that is certainly a big issue here. And then the final thing I'll say about that is that if I'm dating a woman who sees me that way, it's going to be over relatively quickly. And there is no way I'm going to be around a woman who just sees me and paints me with a broad brush, two broad brushes, by the way, a broad brush of men are this way. I'm like, you don't get it. You're relatively immature. You have not gotten to an understanding where you need to treat individuals as individuals. That's the first broad brush. And the second broad brush is, don't paint me, and this one's much harder, but don't paint me with the broad brush of my history. Now, let's be clear. My girlfriend, one of the things that we talked about is she said, oh, my friend was a little concerned about you and your past history, that you had an affair or whatever, and that you cheated. And I said, well, she should be. Your history absolutely matters. Like, that's a good friend. I don't take that at all as she should be. History matters. And at the same time, if you paint me with that broad brush and you see me that way, this isn't going to last very long, because it is difficult to change, but people do change. And you're just going to have to see that I'm different or not. But if you paint me with that broad brush right up front or have in the back of your mind that you're constantly worried about me, this isn't going to last very long. But those are the two ways that I would say this goes wrong. When you just go, all men are this way and they're just trying to plant their seed and they just want to get with women. That is an incredibly naive and immature viewpoint. And at the same time, then if you just go, because they were this way in the past, they must be this way now, is also incredibly damaging to a relationship. And what we're talking about here is next level relationships. We're talking about growth related relationships. And if you do either of those, that's going to be extremely problematic.
Yeah. And I just think too that there is so much to be gained by learning more about the opposite sex. And I don't even really care, like, no matter how you identify, like whether you are straight, gay, doesn't matter. However you identify, there's a lot to be learned from learning from other humans. Again, no matter how you identify, I don't think that it's a good idea to just surround yourself with like one set of people or humans and from a particular group and then just call it a day. Like these are relationships that can continue to be cultivated over time. And so many people come to me wondering how to create friendships as an adult. And one of the aspects to that, I think, is to also be open to creating friendships with someone of the opposite sex. But I also get asked, why do I have a very open, compassionate view on men? And one of the reasons is because I have lots of really incredible men in my life, like very platonically, like amazing men in my life that I get to talk to gain perspectives on that are different from my own and to understand better. And then I'm able to go out into the world and teach that to others. But anyone has access to that. Anyone can go out and cultivate those kinds of friendships and relationships if you're open to it. The other thing actually that as we've been talking about sort of like sharing intimate details of a relationship and stuff, the other thing that I think is actually really interesting to bring up here is about the fact that women tend to share far more sexual details than men. Mm-hmm. And that is such a myth. For some reason, the opposite way is a myth because, a lot of women will have this idea of like what goes on in a locker room, basically just using that as an example, like locker room talk. And I'm like, do you know what men talk about? Men talk about, did you have sex? Yeah. Was it good? Yep. Moving on. Whereas women usually give away, and I have been guilty of this in the past, giving away the very, very intimate details sometimes. And it's not usually meant in a malicious way at all. I think with a lot of women, it can be sort of like is this normal type of thing? Or have you had this type of experience? But then going into some of the intimate details while explaining it. And I don't necessarily think that's okay. I have changed how I approach that usually. But I do think that that's an interesting point to make as well, because a lot of times that's another stereotype that gets fed into, and it's actually in my experience, usually completely wrong. And especially talking to a lot of the men in my life, it's usually completely wrong. Like you guys don't share a ton of details with each other, even than most people seem to expect. But when we can create relationships with the opposite sex, you just get different viewpoints on the world. You expand your worldview, which is what your entire platform is about, Next Level Human, and what my entire platform is about, Room to Grow. It's creating that space where you can expand into the new versions of yourself and to create more compassion, to gain new perspectives, and to see a completely different view of the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. Speaking of, you and I are incredibly close. You've seen me go through several different romantic relationships. I don't think once that I've ever, nor would I, give detailed information about my sex life. Have I ever done that? I'm just curious.
No.
Yeah, and I'm just, and I'm also just thinking of all my best friends. I don't know much about their sex lives, and when they do talk about it, they're mainly talking about themselves. Like, I'm having trouble maintaining an erection, or, I don't know, like what the deal is with it. Usually is around like erections and stuff like that if they're very sort of close. But rarely is it around, she did this or she did that, or her body looks like this, or I'm turned off by this, or it's almost never. I can't even think actually of one encounter that I've had with, and it would be incredibly odd for me. And I'm even thinking back to when I was young. And this brings me to this. I'll just briefly say this. This locker talk thing, because this was a thing with, I forget, was it Trump? I forget who it was, but it was some politician who says something. I think it was Donald Trump or whatever. And it was a big to do. And people were just saying, well, that's just locker talk. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm like, honestly, I have never heard that, and this is high school. I played sports.
You played sports. You were lots of locker rooms.
I was a bouncer. I was around men in very manly No, like I think that is largely a myth. And honestly, I would say I can think of a few people, some of the frat boys I knew, that frat boy type or those type of people. It was like maybe one dude who just everyone thought was an ass.
Yeah.
Like, and everyone sort of looked that way. So I do think that is incredibly, again, the wrong brush to paint for men. And I do think us men, like, we get a bad rap, because of, it's like a few bad apples doing a few messed up things, and most men are not that way. And we become far more, if I hear anything now from a lot of my friends, we become far less likely to confidently go out into the world and approach people in a romantic way. Whereas, flirting, we may have been more comfortable with that, asking people out. We may have been more comfortable than, and nowadays it has become, a lot of us have, been like, this is very uncomfortable. We're in a very uncomfortable, place with it. So I do think that is something that is an issue related to men. Now, the other aspect of this that I would say, because we're talking about this, is you do need to cultivate very good friends. So if we're talking about next level human, I would also say this about my male friends. If I said something about my current romantic partner to any of my male friends, and I started to lean, and this would be the case. I can't think of any of my male friends this wouldn't be the case with. But let's say I started to lean on the side of being derogatory or being like, she's a pain in the ass or whatever. I don't think any of my male friends would do anything but go point me back to being responsible. Like, and they certainly wouldn't buy into that. Where it'd be like, yeah, let's now have a bashing, episode with your romantic partner. Most of them would be turn it back to me and or point out what I was doing.
Right.
This goes again to friendships, and same with the women, that might be in your life, like the women that are in my life, like you. I have several close friends like you who are women who would never and only ever be like, Jade, don't forget, like, and probably be coming to bat for my romantic partner, helping me see what I can't see in that relation. However, I will say the following, and this is something that maybe I'll get your take on, and the audience can give me their own advice silently here as well, because I have something that I'm also pretty clear on, but I'm still, and I alluded to this in a past podcast you and I did, but I'm still like iffy on this. This is an area that I'm still sort of trying to figure out. I do have people in my life who are exes who I've been romantic with, who I have zero desire to be romantic with now or ever again in the future, who I believe feel the same way about me, but I don't know for sure, right? I also have a few people in my life who I was romantically connected with or romantically curious about for a time, who I'm not at all anymore, and who may have been romantically curious about me for a time, who I don't think they are at all anymore. And I'm still friends with these people, and I still hang out with them on occasion, much less because I'm in a romantic relationship now. But that's the relationship that I am a little bit like these. Those are the relationships I'm a little bit like this with. There's history there. I have deep love for some of these people, have zero inclination to be romantic with them. When I was single, I was no longer romantic with them. So this isn't something new. Like, it's going from one, like a recent ex. I would be like, that probably would be a no-no for me. But these are people with history. And I do think that my current romantic partner, or any woman who's getting in a romantic relationship with someone, would be extra uncomfortable with that, perhaps. This is someone you slept with before. This is someone you've been romantic with before, and you're still wanting to be friends with them. That's tricky. And see, where I'm at currently is there was a time where I was like, I want to begin to just distance myself from these people. And I have, and not distance from like, I don't want to be friends with them, but just be less emotionally attached. Partly because I wanted to make the space for my romantic partners, new romantic partners. And I knew that would be uncomfortable. But I'm still in this place where I still think those relationships, as their friendship relationships, are very useful. And there's history there, and I am loyal. And so I do go back and forth with that, right? Like, these are people I don't see much at all anymore, but I still text with, connect with, and make sure it's completely platonic. It's a very normal friendship, but there is that history there. That's a slightly different type of relationship that I could see someone being uncomfortable about. We all have to make our decisions. Right now, I'm leaning towards, look, history wise, I'm not going to not be friends with these people. However, I don't want to be as engaged with them as I once was in general, whether I am single or not. And that's something that I do think is something you're going to have to communicate, especially in that particular dynamic. Now, I don't think many people are like me, so that might not be, but everyone has an ex, one or two that they're still close with, and that becomes.
Do they?
I think so. Do you? Do
No.
you not? You don't have any exes that you're close with?
No.
My current romantic partner does, where there's a major person who they're still friends with, that there's history there and they're still friends with. But this is something that for me, I'm still trying to figure this out because I don't like the idea. And I do think, and I could be corrected on this, but I do think it's relatively an immature thing to be like, because I've slept with you in the past, we can't be friends at all anymore. Now, obviously that relationship, that dynamic has to change, but that is something that I'm a little like this with, that I think I'd be interested in hearing your take on. You
and I have talked about this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We have talked about this a lot because we do differ on this. Now, I also meet you in the middle on this too, because I very much see the different perspectives to it. I'm very open to the different perspectives to it. In my opinion, exes carry an energy. And I think that particularly with a new romantic partner in your life, that it's really important to make sure that person feels comfortable. You are a little bit unusual because I don't know anyone else who maintains nearly as many and nearly as many quality relationships with past lovers and past partners. And it is, again, it's like one of those things where it's some of your qualities that are so beautiful about you that people love and adore. Then that doesn't, you don't just drop someone like a hot potato when you're no longer romantically involved with them. And that's a really beautiful thing. I give you so much credit for that. And I do think that we have to be really conscious of that. Now, in my past, I don't have exes that I particularly want to have any connection with. So it's not really, just for me personally, I always say to you, I'm like, I'm not sure that I'm the best person necessarily to make my argument, because I don't have past exes that I miss particularly. Like, after I moved on from them, like there isn't really anything there that I wanted to continue to keep in my life. There could be people that I'm involved with in the future that maybe I would feel differently about. And I'm very open to that. But I would still be doing whatever I could to make sure that my romantic partner felt incredibly comfortable with whatever connection I had with that. And I would very much be putting distance between me and them, particularly when there was somebody new involved, or even if they had someone new in their life. Again, I don't mean necessarily like I'm never going to be the person to tell someone to cut people out of their life. I'm never going to tell anybody that. Kind of no matter what the dynamic is, like everyone needs to take care of themselves, whatever is best for you. And I do think that there can be beautiful things that we can learn from those people. And having had like a deep connection with someone and a lot of history, you don't necessarily want to just throw that away. If it's the right person to keep in your life and both parties are very clear on the boundaries and everything else, that's great. I also think that there can be instances where if a past partner still has interest in us and we continue to maintain a relationship with them, where is the line? Where is the line where it actually sometimes may become cruel to the other person? It's not that we're even cultivating hope, but if it is truly unhealthy for them, and we can see that quite clearly, the other side of that is also like, who are we to make that decision for them? And that they have to take responsibility for themselves. I get that. So there's and I don't know what the answer is, because I don't think that there is a clear black and white answer, because I don't think there's a clear black and white answer to most things. But that is something to be really conscious of, is recognizing those signs. And there have been times where like, I have pointed some things out to you where I'm like, you may need to take a look a closer look at this and potentially have a shift in opinion on a particular situation because I'm seeing something very different than you are. And you've come back to me a couple times and been like, oh, you're right. Like, I didn't actually notice that until you pointed it out. Or you saw something play out later where you're like, oh yeah, Emily, like you actually called that. And I need to like look at that a different way.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe this is where we can start wrapping up and giving some to-dos, at least from the perspective of what we would do. And this, I'll start with this. 100% agree, 100% understand one of my dysfunctions. And I think we have to know what our dysfunctions are. One of my dysfunctions is perhaps overlook things or to be like, like I'm pretty absent-minded in a lot of ways. My memory, I can look over some subtleties where I give people the benefit of the doubt. But this to me is the first piece. If you see that and you see that, okay, this person obviously is hung up on me in a way. And here's how you know. You know if you are not showing up, let's say, or don't return a text or whatever, and they are needing you. This needy energy of like they need affirmations from you still. They need you to be showing up still. They're going through, really tough times, and you're the only person that they're reaching out to. And it's pretty clear. And I would say that if your romantic partner, this is another thing with romantic partners, if your romantic partner brings it up, then at least it's an issue for them. And it may be something you're missing and you need to pay attention to. And this is where you would go and vent and, perhaps go, hey, Emily, what do you think? Because, my romantic partner thinks this other person is acting this way. I'm not sure. But I do think that ultimately boundaries are critical here. So from my perspective, it is this is how I act. If I know somebody is still romantically into me, now they might be, but if I really sense that they are, then and I'm in a romantic relationship, I will not deal with that. That's just a hard no. And because it's disrespectful to the person that I'm with. And you're right, it's not even helpful to my friend. And I would argue that's actually not a friend. You're not going to know if that's a true friend who's an ex until they are completely disconnected from you. Now, this is the part where I go, it's potentially immature for people to be like, oh, they're always going to feel something for you. No, they're not. And I know they're not because I don't.
Right.
And I think that's a completely immature way to look at it. However, if you know and or you're getting signs, and even if they're not into you, but they're still too romantically or too, not romantically, but too needy and need too much of your energy, that's also potential to have a conversation with that friend and be like, look, I'm with somebody now and I just need some distance so I can focus on growing this. Because that's the other thing I think that is missed. To me, if I was in a relationship with a woman who had a lot of guy friends, to me, it would be fine right up to the point where I was just like, there's no energy. There's no energetic space for me to come in and be a man in your life because you've got all these other men in your life. And all I am then is sex for you. And that's not okay with me because I want to be connected and deeply connected in a different way.
That intimacy.
The intimacy is important. So I think setting that boundary with yourself and other people. With yourself, I don't think it is appropriate to have people in your life who are romantically interested in you. And that's their primary drive to want to keep interacting with you while you're with someone else. If you know that for sure, I think that should be over. I also think that, on the other side, if you're with a romantic partner who is got lots of, people of the opposite sex, like if I'm with a woman who has lots of men in her life that are platonic male friendships, but it feels such that there's no space for me as a man because there's so many, that's also an issue. So that's one to do that I would say. And the other thing I would say is that being very careful, like I know with my current romantic partner, I've done some things because I'm absent-minded that I want to be better with. Like some of the things of like introducing her, like this because you hang out with me just as a friend. And sometimes I'll see friends and I won't necessarily introduce you. I'll forget. Mainly because I forget the names of those people. And Emily is one, like a lot of my friends know that they just know because I'm bad with names and I have lots of acquaintances.
It's a JT to memory.
Yeah. And you will do it. And a lot of my friends they'll just go ahead and introduce themselves. Yeah. So because they're like, Jade doesn't remember this person's name. So I'm going to like introduce myself so he can remember their name. But there's things like that I need to get better with because that can add to the dysfunction where it's like, oh, he's not owning me. And I think that's a big sign too. Like to me, I'm like, if you can't own your romantic partner, you don't deserve to be in any kind of relationship. You just don't get it yet.
Yeah.
And owning them means owning them publicly.
Right.
And this is an issue that young men, I think, often have. And those are two things that I would start with, that I would be like, here's some guidelines that I would use if I'm vetting people in particular, but also things like I think with men. Like men, I do think if they're still in that young man, let me spread my seed, let me get notches on the belt place, they're not going to own you. They're going to subtly want to stiff arm you in a way. And it will be very subtle, but it will make, their romantic partner, they'll know. Intuitively, that romantic partner is going to kind of be like, that's a little weird. They never, even in social media, they never reshare when I post them, or they keep me out of, any post, almost like they're single, and that kind of stuff I think is problematic. And you just got to, it's all about boundaries. And then the final thing for me in what to do is I would say this, and to me, this really is about the integrity of the relationship and helping the relationship get better. Quality time together, a lot of it, and make sure that you're doing that. And quality time with your other friends. And then quality time with your friends and them. There's three sort of dynamics you have to have. In my mind, it's a mistake to go, I'm just going to be with my partner and we're going to be that relationship. And I also think it's kind of a mistake to go, I'm going to have my partner relationship, then I'm going to have my friend relationships. I'm going to keep them separate. That is a big problem, right? What should be going on most of the time is that my romantic partners are integrated into these other friendships in a way that they don't feel threatened by them. So there's times where, we're all hanging out together, and there's times where I'm hanging out with just my friends so I can get that energy and bring it back. And there's times where obviously most of the time I'm hanging out with my partner. And you need to be aware of that, because I do think that's when you start opening yourself up to problems. If you completely compartmentalize these relationships.
I totally agree with that, because then there's this distrust potentially as a partner to go, well, how seriously do they take me as a partner if they won't even introduce me to their people
or include me when they're hanging out?
Yeah, that inclusion piece is like an entire love language in and of itself, and I think that's really important. I'm so glad you brought that up about the not, like, we aren't saying, okay, then have your partner and also just have your friends. Like, there needs to be some crossover as well, because that's really, really important, and it shows that you are proud to be with that person too. Like, that's a really big piece of the inclusion, is letting your partner know that, like, you're important to me, and I want to share you with the other most important people in my life, and vice versa. That's really, really important. So I hope that we've given people some points on this. I don't really have anything else to add other than the fact that, I mean, ultimately, I think our main point is pretty clear, is that men and women can be friends, just friends. And if 100%. Anyone wants examples, we are right here.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that it is a maturity thing, and I think it's something to be thinking about.
Yeah, I love it. Cool. All right, my friend.
All right.
Love you.
See you next time.